Welcome to the Infowars Nightly News. I'm your host, Melissa Melton, for this Friday, February 15th, 2013 edition. And our top story tonight is actually whether experts are pondering whether a meteorite shower, which caused a panic in Russia when it breached the atmosphere, it injured over 900 people, it devastated buildings, and it wiped out all cell phone networks and crashed there. And as soon as that happened, within minutes, wild hypotheses about kinetic bombardment weaponry that the U.S. had aimed at Russia, or whether or not Russia had shot this asteroid down themselves, began proliferating all over the internet. We're still not sure, but it definitely doesn't look natural, and we'll definitely keep you updated on that as the story unfolds. Now, switching gears, the Pentagon is actually set to reward drone operators with medals now, despite the fact that drones have killed thousands of innocent women and children all across the Middle East. They've decided they're going to go ahead and give them weapons, or go ahead and give them medals, excuse me. And the AP reports this medal would become the 4th highest ranking combat decoration, placing it above the Bronze Star. And actually, I think what's even more troublesome about this article isn't just the fact that they're going to give drone operators medals now, but the fact that it's noted in here that Senator Rand Paul actually asked CI nominee Paul Brennan whether or not he believed the president has the power to authorize lethal force to use a drone to strike down a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil, and Brennan has yet to answer that question. So that, to me, should concern us all. That is very disconcerting that he won't give us that answer. I think we all know what they believe the answer is, regardless of our Constitution. And after this Dorner case, we see all these calls for expanded domestic drone use, so that's definitely pretty disconcerting. And in other news, the Judicial Watch has broken that the USDA training videos now for cultural sensitivity training are actually telling people to call Pilgrims illegal aliens, the Pilgrims. And apparently the program also requires employees to chant the Pilgrims were illegal aliens, and they cannot use the word minorities. They're instead supposed to call them emerging majorities. And this isn't even anything new, because as we've seen, the DHS has other training videos they also put out where they call the Founding Fathers terrorists, and returning veterans are terrorists now in their reports, so are constitutionalists. So that's what our money is going to fund, that kind of training. And in other DHS news, actually, this week The Hill reported that Janet Napolitano has said that the U.S. borders have never, ever been stronger. But in this special report we're about to see from Alex and crew, they traveled down to Big Bend, and they were stopped at a checkpoint 70 miles north of the border. They were asked questions. People are checked like that all the time, U.S. citizens all the time. And yet they were able to film illegal immigrants just casually walking right across the border like it's no big deal.
Some of my fondest memories were as a child traveling from Dallas, Texas down to the furthest point you can basically get to in southwest Texas, something right out of a Louis L'Amour novel, Big Bend, Texas. It's a conflagration of different chains of mountain ranges that come together, and right in the middle of it runs the Rio Grande River. Some of the towns that are 20, 30 miles away from the entrance only have about 100 or so people living in their town. In fact, one town famously has elected and re-elected a beer-drinking goat as their mayor. And I wanted to go down to Big Bend to see how it had changed since I was a child and since I had last been there about 20 years ago in college. And boy, has it changed. Just like other areas all over the Southwest into Texas, they've got Border Patrol checkpoints of up to 100 miles inside the United States. And I've noticed the Border Patrol normally wants to just inspect citizens and leaves the illegals alone. Now, at one point, I went to a gorgeous spot in Big Bend, right on the Rio Grande, and Mexico is just right across the river. Where there was a resort about 80 years ago where people came and visited the amazing hot springs. And you could see illegals, the 2 times we went there over the weekend, just coming and going back and forth across the border. And I talked to some of the locals. They said if you camp out there at night, sometimes hundreds of people rush across and are picked up by the coyotes, or the people smugglers, as they're called. Here we are in Big Bend on the U.S.-Mexico border. There's the Rio Grande River. And the Mexicans just pass at will. We were out here at night last night when we were leaving, and there were just dozens of people going back and forth. Hi. Pretty friendly folks. And it was just incredible to then see the Border Patrol helping, and we didn't get footage of this because we just wanted to get out of there, searching the U.S. citizens that had come down there to drink Coors Light and throw footballs, back and forth to each other across the river, and to be writing tickets and arresting people for drinking a couple beers while illegal aliens crossed at will. They were friendly, on horseback and back across, and as coyotes ferried people back and forth across, even on canoes. We even ran into one fella who was singing songs from across the border if you'd give $5 to his compadre. Big Bend is one of the least visited national parks because it's a good 300 miles from even San Antonio. So there aren't any big cities for a long, long way. And it's the same story on the Mexico side. When we came through the internal checkpoint about 75 miles from Big Bend inside the United States, I informed the Border Patrol that if they tried to have us go over to the secondary area, as routinely happens when I go down to South Padre with my family to the beach, that I was going to get out and interview them about Fast and Furious. We're driving up to the checkpoint about, 70 miles from the Texas border, right, Richard?
I guess so, roughly about 70, 80 miles.
And we like to go down to South Padre, but we noticed they just let all the other 18-wheelers and stuff through, but they always want to pull us aside. Now, we've never been through this, or at least since I was a teenager, I haven't been through these internal checkpoints down by Big Bend. So we are going to see what happens. We're going to declare that obviously we haven't been down to Mexico. We don't have anything to declare. But we've noticed this is really used just to go after citizens. In fact, we saw Border Patrol assisting park rangers at Big Bend in bugging the hell out of people who were drinking beer down on the border on the Rio Grande. And so, and of course, they also are looking for drugs constantly, something that the government itself has been caught bringing in. There's just a big report out about the Border Patrol with unprecedented corruption. So this is their big prize right here. And I am planning to talk to them about a whole bunch of different issues as soon as we get off and have a chance to talk to them. So that is my main.
There's another immigrant searching dogs.
Yep, there's another immigrant searching dogs. It's really for U.S. citizens. Here we go.
How you doing?
How many in the vehicle?
6.
6. Everybody U.S. citizens?
Yep.
Sir.
Okay. Where are you coming from?
We went down to Big Bend with a family.
What are you doing, sir? Us.
I'm videotaping. I'm Alex Jones, man. You guys are videotaping us?
Videotaping with what?
With my phone right here.
But we're videotaping you?
Of course you are.
Where's that?
So you're going to pretend you don't have cameras watching us? I mean, that's like a joke, man.
So how was your trip down there?
It was awesome. It was awesome. Hey, I wanted to talk to you guys. I hoped you pulled us over to the secondary area because I wanted to ask about Fast and Furious and Obama shipping guns into Mexico and why you guys aren't trying to investigate him.
No comment. You have a good one, gentlemen.
Okay, you too, man. Have a good one. Well, every time I've drove through these checkpoints, they want to search me. This was the magic phrase: government running a false flag by shipping tens of thousands of guns into Mexico to demonize and try to ban the Second Amendment. And so they said I could go ahead and go on my way. So there you go. They do not want to be interviewed about the government staging an event. And of course, my father, who was with us, wanted to add that he saw a scanner that looks for radioactive material, and he pointed out the Border Patrol is, quote, doing some good. Absolutely. I'm not enemies with the Border Patrol. One of the few things the feds can do constitutionally is coin the money, have a Navy, and protect the border. Dad, tell us what a proton detector is, what you saw back there.
It's basically a magnetic grid device that detects heavy particles that go through it, so that they actually were looking to detect somebody bringing radiologicals through it.
Exactly. No. The Border Patrol serves some real functions. We don't want them to sit there like we saw and assist the regular police and others in harassing folks from drinking beer on the Rio Grande. See my point?
That was a heavy particle detector, so they're doing some good work.
I understand. So you saw the heavy particle detector down there. I saw Border Patrol aiding park rangers in writing tickets and harassing people who were drinking beer there on the side of the Rio Grande. And I'm sick and tired of the nanny state engaging in these type of activities. I've got to say it. I've been in the Rockies. I've been in the Appalachians, the Smokies. I've been in mountains all over North America and in Mexico. But the way the Chizos and other mountain ranges come together in Big Bend is absolutely gorgeous. And some of these time lapses that Rob Dew from Infowars that went on the trip with us got are simply amazing. So our fact-finding mission discovered that Big Bend is still just as gorgeous as ever, and that the Border Patrol has intensified its presence, but unfortunately just isn't even allowed to stop the illegal aliens. And if they do stop them, it's on record that Obama simply gives them a green card and points them to the latest polling place so they can vote to take the Second Amendment away from the United States and disarm the American people like the Mexican people have sadly been disarmed in Mexico as well. And remember, Mexico has had all of their guns taken. They've had all of their firearms taken the last 30 years. They have the highest crime rate in the world. Over 55,000 people killed in just the last 6 years because only the criminals and the criminal government has the guns. On our way back through West Texas to Austin and Central Texas, we came across Boone Pickens' boondoggle. Hundreds and hundreds of derelict windmills just sitting out in the middle of nowhere, rusting. But that's what happens under the whole fake green energy initiative. Well, that's the Infowars.com visit to Big Bend in 2013. We figured we better see the parks because all over the United States they're restricting human access and even telling people they can't get in the water at national parks. In fact, I went to the National Seashore in Texas in 2012, where I've been going since I was a small child, and was harassed over and over and over again by the park rangers asking us questions and asking us if we were criminals while we sat there in lawn chairs. So again, you better visit the national parks before the environmentalist control freaks kick you off of them.
Well, it seems many do not trust the government. Actually, as Max Slavo reports, guns and ammo production are now maxed out. This is a society preparing for war. And apparently a guns and ammo industry report has indicated that every major gun and ammunition manufacturer in the country is running at 100% capacity. Many are behind, way behind schedule, and billions of rounds of ammunition are now being created every single week in an attempt to keep up with this demand, which is probably why the DHS is trying to buy it all up. So good luck with that, DHS. And speaking of the Second Amendment, MSNBC's Chris Matthews has actually said that natural rights and the Second Amendment are racist, straight up. Apparently, the NRA's Wayne LaPierre wrote for the Daily Caller. He said, hurricanes, tornadoes, riots, terrorists, lone criminals, these are all perils we're sure to face. It's not a maybe. And it's not paranoia to buy a gun, it's survival. So apparently exercising your natural rights to protect yourself and to survive is now considered to be racist. And speaking of more mainstream drivel, apparently Al Gore showed up on the Ellen DeGeneres show so they could talk about chemtrails. DeGeneres asked Al Gore about spraying particulates in the air to block out the sun, and he kind of laughed it off and said, yeah, scientists have proposed that. That's just crazy. What we really need to save the Earth is basically his carbon tax initiative, because what he would like you to do is pay the government so that you can breathe, and then he'll get some of that money in his pocket. And somehow, making Al Gore richer, apparently, according to him, his logic, that's going to save the Earth. So, yay for that. And in other news, Merck actually published a study pushing antidepressant use with vaccines. And I actually wrote an article about this that was up on Infowars today because I just could not believe it. A new study published in the Journal of Clinical Infectious Diseases actually claims that taking antidepressants will increase vaccine effectiveness. And 4 people from Merck were listed on this study, and the study was about Merck's shingles vaccine, so big surprise there. But I think what was even more disconcerting about this is actually where it says The possible connection, however, is potentially significant. If antidepressants increase the efficacy of shingles vaccines in those who are depressed, such treatment may have a similar effect on the immune response of depressed patients to other important vaccines, such as those against influenza. So they're just going to spread this right out and say that if you take a vaccine, which they want everyone to take, then you get depressed, which they think everybody pretty much is, because if you have emotions, you need to be on medications. Then basically you need to take antidepressants now on top of your vaccines to make them work better. It's not a question of whether or not the vaccines work. It's just a question of you not taking enough antidepressants. And what we're actually seeing with this is basically a big pharma full spectrum dominance. And I honestly do not know where the logic comes from that says taking antidepressants makes your vaccines work. I think it's probably the same place where Al Gore's logic comes from, that if you give him money, he'll somehow save the earth with it. And actually, speaking of antidepressants, I saw this in the Mail online. Fish are becoming easier to catch now because traces of antidepressants are getting into the water supply and making them more relaxed. And actually, guys, if you scroll down to the second picture, I thought this was kind of interesting. The caption under there says, drugged up scientists studied the behavior of perch exposed to a sedative. So I guess the scientists were drugged up while they were doing the study, but the fish were made easier to catch. And we've seen other reports come out where shrimp have actually had suicidal tendencies off the coasts, and they swim right into fishermen nets and when they usually would swim into the dark because of antidepressants in the water. If these drugs are making these animals easier to catch, they're making them suicidal, what do you think they're doing to you and your family? That's the question I have. And actually, coming up in this broadcast, I'm going to talk to clinical psychologist Dr. Bruce Levine about that. But first, let's go to the quote of the day. The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government. And that was Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death's Patrick Henry who said that. And we will be right back after this break.
Infowars.com is proud to introduce the new Infowars skateboards by Alien Workshop. Skaters have always been against the grain socially. Now wake up your friends politically. Just go to InfowarsStore.com. We have Divide and Conquer or Brainwashing. Then take your deck to your local skate shop, pick out your own trucks, your own wheels, and then hit the streets and wake some people up. Here is legendary skateboarder Jake Nunn.
This one has a lot more concave than I have on my board, and I like concave. It makes it easier to turn and feel the board. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's almost the same shape as mine. It's not really a sport, and it's not really art. It's just kind of freedom, you know? I've listened to Alex Jones for a long time, and I love what Infowars does. I've always loved Alien Workshop, too. I think it's kind of cool you guys got together. This one's pretty nice. Definitely one for the wall, one for the collection. Also good to skate.
Get these limited edition decks at InfowarsStore.com.
This is Jake Nunn. Get these beautiful new skateboards at Infowars.com. Alien Workshop collaboration. Good stuff.
Alex Jones here with a message that could revolutionize health in this country. Going back about 1.5 years ago, I began to learn about the incredible health effects of longevity products. Aaron Dykes lost 92 pounds. We're going to show you some before and afters. Aaron, break down what happened, your story.
I've worked really hard with diet and exercise to try to lose weight, but I just didn't get the results. It just didn't happen. Then I saw what you were doing with InfowarsTeam.com. I wasn't even trying to lose weight, but I got it because I wanted to feel better energy. I wanted that nutrition. Didn't even understand how that could kickstart my own weight loss goals, but the products did that for me. I found myself suddenly losing weight, more energetic, wanting to exercise, wanting to eat the right foods.
And they don't even advertise it as weight loss. I want to challenge our radio listeners to go to InfowarsTeam.com. Sign up as a distributor and get wholesale pricing discounts at InfowarsTeam.com.
We are back, and tonight I am going to be joined by clinical psychologist Dr. Bruce Levine. I want to talk to him a little bit about how all these kids in schools are being suspended and expelled for things like bringing a paper gun to school. Now, he's authored actually several books, including Surviving America's Depression Epidemic and Common Sense Rebellion, Taking Back Your Life from Drugs, Shrinks, Corporations, and a World Gone Crazy. He joins us now. Thank you for coming on today, Dr. Levine.
Sure, great to be here.
Well, okay, since the Sandy Hook shooting, we've seen, for lack of a better word, people are basically freaking out over guns in this country, and our government is now openly trying to restrict our Second Amendment. And in the last couple months in schools, we've actually seen a lot of incidences of children being suspended and expelled for bringing toy guns to school. We've seen kindergartners get expelled for playing cops and robbers on the playground and using their finger as a gun and saying "pow." We even saw a little girl with a piece of paper. It was shaped like an L, and they said, "That's a paper gun, you can't have that." And they searched her in front of the class. They were calling her a murderer. Even a little 5-year-old with a Hello Kitty bubble gun, they said it's a terrorist threat. And these kids are having nightmares, they're crying. What does it do to these little kids when they do this to them in their school?
Well, certainly when adults overreact and show poor judgment and suspend, expel kids young kids for doing that kind of thing, I mean, one of a couple of things are going to happen depending on their temperament, depending on these kids' personality. Some of them will get very depressed and feel shamed and feel something's horrible about themselves. It'll be traumatizing. For some of these other kids, they'll just, it'll be an early experience of having no respect for authorities. They'll immediately think these authorities are idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. So those are some of the different kinds of reactions that kids will have when adults use really poor judgment and overreact.
Well, I mean, does a 5-year-old even really have a concept that their little toy is a gun or their finger saying "pow" is a threat to anybody? I mean, do they even really understand that?
I think they're thinking they're just being kids. They're not thinking that they're doing anything violent. And for most of society, a 5-year-old pointing their finger and going bang and playing cops and robbers prior to all these school shootings, prior to Sandy Hook, would have not been noticed, and nothing would have been stated about it unless it was going on in a classroom and it was disrupting some kind of teaching, which is not the case with these kids.
Well, doesn't it, I mean, it doesn't just affect the kid that's being punished either. It also affects all the rest of the kids in class. It's sort of like a group brainwashing almost, in saying that guns are bad. We need to not even look at a gun, don't play with a gun, don't even think about a gun. Right,
but I think part of it is that on these extreme examples, in some ways we're missing the larger, scarier point. These examples that you're talking about, they certainly have gone on where teachers and administrators have used colossally horrible, overreacting judgment here, a lack of judgment. But that's less scary for me because those are a handful, not that many events have happened on that kind. I mean, every one that have happened, we're going to see on the news. But the ones that are happening, millions of events are happening all the time where kids are normally going through being depressed or maybe obsessing too much on something or having anxiety. And these kids are being labeled and pathologized and put on medications that we now know are often making these kids more likely to commit violent acts. We know these from the statistics.
Well, actually, that brings up my next point, because a frequent contributor to Infowars, John Rappaport, wrote an article about all these incidents, and he said that it's really more like an operant conditioning kind of thing for a thought crime, where they'll say, these are adverse thoughts you're having when you have these little guns or you play cops and robbers, and use that as an excuse to then later put these kids on psychiatric medications.
Well, I don't think a lot of these kids who are just pointing their fingers. I mean, psychologists, psychiatrists, they are doing a lot of horrible things, but I mean, even a lot of those reports that you talk about, some of the psychologists themselves were laughing that these were overreactions, and lots of kids who are just pointing a finger, a 5-year-old, are not going to be immediately put on Prozac or antidepressants. That's not the scary thing. The scary things are that there are millions of kids who actually are depressed. They actually have good reasons to be angry. They maybe are worrying a lot about things, and these are the kids who are being just easily, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, being put on medication, and we now know that there's a lot of strong negative reactions to these medications, that they produce manic responses, that a lot of these school shooters, we know documented over 66 of these school shooters have been on medications, been on antidepressants, been on these psychostimulants like Ritalin, and these are the really scary kinds of things.
Definitely. Well, actually, that brings up a good point, too, because in the president's executive orders that he issued after Sandy Hook, one of the things he said is that they want to get more young people on treatment. It just said treatment. Isn't that like saying they're basically going to put more young people on these drugs, which we know have side effects? They cause hostility, they cause increased suicidal tendencies, aggression, mood swings, all kinds of things.
That's the scary thing. Now, a lot of these kids really do need help, but mental health treatment, at least standard mental health treatment in America, is exactly what you said. It's like if a kid is labeled as depressed, and we know from the CDC in 2011, among teenagers 12 to 17, 3.7% are on antidepressants, which translates out to over 1 million kids in America are on antidepressants just in that age group. And we also know, and this is off of a manufacturer's report, the people who make Luvox, which, by the way, was the drug that Eric Harris, who was a shooter in Columbine, was on, that 4%, this is Solvay, this is their report, it's very conservative, 4% have manic reactions. So 4% using manufacturer's report of 1 million kids on antidepressant, that's over 40,000 kids who are going to have manic reactions. What's that? Poor judgment, impulsivity, agitation, sometimes even delusions, hallucinations. And that's off of lots of other folks who've looked at these things say that manic reactions are much higher. When these kids go off of these drugs, which they do because they're kids, they'll withdraw off of them, you'll have these extreme kind of what the antidepressant discontinuation syndrome, which is just a withdrawal response that can make a kid have akathisia, which makes you feel like you're coming out of your skin. And so we know just off of that one class of drugs, antidepressants, we've turned loose thousands of kids who are going to potentially do some things very destructive. And of course, kids, we've got 3.5 million kids in America on these Ritalin, Adderall, speed, ADHD kind of drugs. And we know that perhaps as many as 10% of these kids move into these kind of manic reactions and get diagnosed as bipolar. So there's another couple of 100,000 kids that we've just turned loose out there because the reaction in America today is when kids are having any kind of difficulty, when they're somewhat depressed, often for good reasons, or they're anxious, often for good reasons, we put them on medication, and we're not looking at these horrific adverse effects that when you look at them in the aggregate of these huge amount of numbers, even if they're small percentages like 4% become manic, well, 4% of 1 million kids on antidepressants is a lot of kids who could become manic and dangerous.
I've actually read several things in the last few days that have really disturbed me about SSRIs, one of them being that the fastest growing age group that's taking these medications is actually preschoolers.
Well, I haven't seen those statistics, but we know that in America, when I was starting out in practice 25 years ago, you would never see a little kid on these psychiatric drugs. I mean, the idea of pediatric bipolar disorder was unheard of. It was, the idea of labeling a 3- and 4-year-old with a bipolar disorder just seemed ridiculous. I mean, the symptoms of bipolar having to do with poor judgment and grandiosity and lability, all these symptoms were what people said was what a normal for a 3-year-old. And this whole idea of kids being labeled younger and younger with these kinds of conditions that are just kind of normal. Kids who are 3 and 4 years old who are just not paying attention because they're 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds being labeled with ADHD and be given these speed amphetamine type of drugs. This is all very new stuff in the last 10, 15 years, and it's terrifying. And of course, it's all driven by drug company profit.
Well, that's my next question, actually, because, I mean, there's been a huge uptick. We've seen an increase of like 400%, I read, in antidepressant use since 1988. Last year, it was declared that it was one of the #1 prescriptions in the age group from 18 to 44. I mean, we are using a massive amount of antidepressants in this country. I think it's 1 in 10 people now take it. Most people that take it for more than 2 years, the majority. What is this causing this huge uptick in all this antidepressant use?
Well, just in this one class of drugs, we're focused on antidepressants. In terms of the whole issue of potential violence, school shooters, we know, for example, as I mentioned before, and viewers could look this up on, there's a lot of websites on this. SSRI Stories is one good website, but we know there's 66 documented school shooters, and that's not included. There's a lot of these ones people suspect okay, like this recent Adam Lanza, but that's not even included among the 66 because we don't have a coroner's report on that yet. But these are confirmed. The 66 school shooters have been on these different kinds of medications. So I mentioned Eric Harris on the antidepressant Lovix, the Columbine, one of the 2 Columbine shooters. Lots of these folks who are famous here. Kip Kenkel in Springfield, Oregon, was on Prozac and on Ritalin. The kid in Red Lake, Minnesota, who shot around 10 folks, he was on 60 milligrams of Prozac, and so it goes on and on. And we know that this is no accident because, again, as I mentioned before, a significant number of folks who are taking these drugs are going to have manic reactions. They're going to be what we call disinhibited. So when you take a psychotropic drug of any kind, whether it's Prozac or cocaine, all these psychotropic drug means that a drug that affects one's neurotransmitter, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. And for many people who take these, you get the sense of being disinhibited, which means that you just do things that you would never ordinarily do, okay, which often happens when people use alcohol. It's just one of those things that happen when you're not on these kind of psychotropic drugs. Things pass through your mind that you never act on. You're not impulsive. You don't do anything about. But when you're on these kinds of drugs, you're much more likely to act on thoughts you would never act on. And if for kids who are walking around with a lot of rage, that spells trouble, and it has spelled some serious destructive trouble for society, for their schools, and for themselves.
Yeah, and we see these commercials on TV all the time. And when the commercials first started for these drugs, it was more specific about what your symptoms were, and it was like, ask your doctor today. And now it just seems like these commercials say, do you have emotions? Tell your doctor to give you drugs. I mean, it's amazing.
Right. I mean, and they know the people who make these commercials are very, very clever, very, very smart. They're smart enough to realize that they could put on these drug commercials, which, by the way, were illegal in America up until 1997 when the drug company Power convinced the government to allow these commercials on TV. So we're one of the 2 countries in the industrial world that allow these commercials on. And they're very clever. They realize that they could spend 75% of that commercial listing side effects, horrific side effects. If you actually listen to the commercials and don't mute them, which a lot of us do, including myself nowadays, I get so sick of hearing them. But it doesn't matter because the visuals of seeing a person who's upset and hurting and all of a sudden taking a pill and then the happy music and the happy smile, those are powerful manipulative forces that get people to ask their doctor. And we also know from lots of studies is once you go in and you ask your doctor for some Prozac or Paxil or any of these kind of antidepressants, you're going to get them. You may not have such an easy time scoring benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax. Doctors are a little bit more reluctant because they've been taught those things are highly addictive. But you can score Prozac, Paxil, like from any doctor very easily.
Almost like a candy machine.
Sure.
When did you become aware that these things weren't actually helping anybody?
When did I become aware of that?
That they were hurting more than helping.
Well, we've known for a long time. And anything you do in life is a cost-benefit analysis. And the scary thing about antidepressants is that we've known for a long time, and now this is finally being revealed in the mainstream press. It's actually 60 Minutes did a big story on this. Is that we know Prozac compared to placebo really doesn't work very well. In fact, in the majority of trials, when you compare Prozac or any of these antidepressants to a sugar pill placebo, the antidepressants fail to outperform the placebo. So in general, the positive effects of these antidepressants are really, we would be better off if doctors could still give placebo sugar pills. And so there's not really great positive effects as there are with things like antibiotics are very important for certain people with certain infections. So there's very little scientifically in terms of positive effects, and there's horrible adverse effects. So in terms of a drug having been approved, these drugs should never have been approved when you consider how horrible the adverse effects are and how little any kind of beneficial effects. Now, that's not to say there's not going to be 25-30% of people out there who take these Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, who say, oh, it saved their life, it was great. But that's true for sugar pills as well, okay? So you have what we call the placebo effect is mostly what makes these drugs really, really work for people.
Well, I want to get your opinion on this. I actually wrote an article that's up on Infowars today about this. A study was released yesterday that actually claims that people who have major depressive disorder, if they take antidepressants, it will help make their vaccines more effective. That's the new, and it was co-written. There were 20 authors on this study. 4 of them are actually employed by Merck, and the vaccine that they were talking about was one of Merck's vaccines for shingles.
Well, there you go.
So,
I mean, that's the thing I think that your audience is much more aware of than the general public, but that all of these studies that are performed on any of these antidepressants, they're all being funded and on all these drugs in general, all being funded by the drug companies. A lot of Americans still have the fantasy that the Food and Drug Administration actually studies these drugs independently, and it's not the case. All of these drugs, the data that is given to the FDA for approval is off of studies that are paid for by the drug companies themselves. And we know drug companies have gotten into some serious trouble over the years, some serious fines, because they've held back negative effects on these drugs, and also too the way they perform the studies. Again, because they've already sunk millions of dollars in the pre-approval process. Once they get to do these studies, there's so much incentive to have them look good that they doctor up these studies. The research design makes these drugs always look much better than they really are. And so over the years, a lot of us have come to see this phenomenon that these drugs have been declared, especially psychiatric drugs like antidepressants, have been declared safe and effective. And then, lo and behold, as these drugs are moving towards the end of their patent, which has happened with Prozac, it's no longer patented, is that all of a sudden you see these studies showing like, well, it's not really that safe and it's pretty dangerous. Why is that? Because drug companies don't care anymore. They don't care when generics can be handed out on them. They want everybody to get all excited about the new group of drugs that they've patented that they can make a ton of money on. So that's been the cycle since I've been a psychologist for over 30 years, that we hear all this nonsense about these drugs being safe and effective and on until they're about ready to go off patent, and then we hear all the truth.
Well, I actually read that America, though we're obviously not the largest country in the world, we take the most psychiatric medications of any other country in the world. Why do you think that is?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is that the drug companies have so much more power here than anywhere else. They're able to get these commercials on television here, where a lot of the rest of the world realize it's insane to expose the general public, especially kids, to propaganda about go ask your doctor if you got depressed. So drug companies have that going for them. They also, in America, are able to throw money at the American Psychiatric Association, throw money at the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, throw money at psychiatric departments and universities, and almost every way that the general public and doctors hear about drugs, get information about these drugs, is really, if you follow the money trail, not that far you have to follow it. It all comes from drug companies. So it's very rare that anybody is getting any kind of information, seeing any kind of studies that isn't drug company backed. And so, and think about it, if you were running a drug company where you had products like even these antipsychotics. I'll give you an example. I've written a lot about Zyprexa, which is made by Eli Lilly, which that was their big money maker after Prozac. And so Zyprexa has achieved $4 billion a year, $5 billion a year. This is a huge amount of money. And when you know that your product could potentially make that kind of money, to throw $1 million here to a university department, a couple of million here to an institution, or throw a couple of million here to somebody who's leaving National Institute of Mental Health, who's been friendly to you, this is chump change. So they're spending a little bit of money. They even tolerate huge fines against them, which is also the case. They were busted for off-label marketing this Zyprexa, which means they illegally marketed this antipsychotic to people, to doctors to use for kids who weren't psychotic, to use for old people who are disruptive in old age homes. You're not allowed to do that. It's illegal. It's off-label marketing. But so they get fined $1 billion. Well, that's about what they make in one quarter for Zyprexa. So it's all about, these drug companies are smart enough to spend a few bucks here to make tons of money elsewhere. And you could pull that off in the United States of America.
Well, excuse the pun, but it's crazy. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Levine.
Sure, glad to be here.
And people can find you at brucelevine.net. Do you have any projects coming up?
No, I've written about this book, a lot about this in Surviving America's Depression Epidemic, which was my prior book before Get Up, Stand Up. And in Surviving America's Depression Epidemic, I talk about this, a lot of what we're talking about here today, but also different ways of dealing with depression besides pharmaceuticals.
Well, people definitely need to look into this. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you, Melissa.
And that about wraps it up for tonight's Infowars Nightly News. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to us at prisonplanet.tv. You get, for $5.95, you get 11 people that can come on at once. You get all of our special reports, the nightly news, a daily radio show, and it definitely helps fund our operation to get this information out there that is so sorely needed when our mainstream media won't talk about any of this stuff. And I've been your host, Melissa Melton. We'll see you back again Monday at 7 p.m. Central.